long Reddit post about a student who was obsessed with her professor. I'd like to get some professors' perspective on this situation. First, I was generally a strong student throughout my undergraduate education, graduated with a 3.93 GPA and 6 graduate-level credits in history. During my last undergraduate semester, however, I experienced housing insecurity and spent over half the semester moving every few days not knowing if I would end up homeless. During that semester, I was taking a graduate-level history class in the area I want to study in graduate school, but because of my housing situation, I had a much later start on the paper than intended. My professor was aware of these circumstances. Additionally, I experienced depression toward the end of the semester, which significantly impaired my concentration, though it was situational and not clinical depression. I also have an anxiety disorder. Long story short, between the housing situation and depression, my paper, the one chance I had to prove I could handle graduate-level research, did not turn out as planned. There were egregious typos, mistakes, and formatting/citation problems. I ended up receiving an A on that paper, but because of the way it turned out, I didn't feel comfortable directly asking for a letter of recommendation. I did receive an A in the course. Instead, I asked if I could contact her in the future for such a letter, and she replied that I could contact her in the future grad school applications. I perceived this as a hint that she didn't want to write one, but having permission to contact her, I figured I would create another project that could demonstrate my capability to her. I ended up submitting a proposal before beginning the project to an academic conference I knew she would be attending. This was the first conference proposal I had ever written or submitted, and it was accepted for presentation. So, with the hopes of us collaborating on this project and earning a strong letter of recommendation, I emailed her asking for help finding volunteers to interview. It was an oral history project, and she was president of the organization. However, instead of even congratulating me on having my proposal accepted, she responded curtly/coldly. Ostensibly, she was displeased that I had submitted the proposal before beginning the project/asking for assistance. However, I was deeply hurt by her tone since I admired her so much. I asked her to be my graduate advisor and assumed she probably devalued me after the research paper in her class. Nonetheless, I wrote her back a few days later offering to withdraw the proposal, but when she ignored that email I complained to the department chair and mentioned the tone of her previous email. I later attempted to repair our relationship by apologizing for overreacting to her tone, explained my anxiety disorder and even that I felt depressed towards the end of the semester and asked directly for a letter of recommendation, but she again ignored my email. I did mention having documentation of my anxiety disorder, and again, she was aware of my housing situation. While I would not have expected her to exaggerate the merits of the paper, I don't see why she couldn't have explained that despite facing extremely trying circumstances, I managed to complete all coursework and a research project and did well in the class. It's distressing knowing that someone I respected does not think I'm even intelligent enough to earn a master's degree. Not that a master's degree isn't an accomplishment, but it's not as if I were applying to a highly selective PhD program, in which case her indirect decline would have been more understandable. Alternatively, does this seem to be more about the complaint? Regardless of what she thought of the paper, she could have responded politely. And I did attempt to repair the relationship. Again, I'd appreciate professors' perspectives on this. Original poster, then posts on legal advice. A few months after I had graduated, I sent one of my professors an email asking for assistance with a project that I wanted to present at a conference. My proposal was accepted. Although I only had her for 2 semesters, we seemed to have a good rapport and I greatly admired her. As such, I was shocked and hurt when I perceived her reply as curt, yet I decided to write to her one more time offering to withdraw the proposal to test whether or not she was mad at me. I should mention that I have generalized anxiety disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder. She typically responded to emails within 24 hours, so when she didn't by the next day, feeling very upset and anxious, I impulsively wrote to the department chair, not only mentioning the tone of her previous reply, but 2 other times when I perceived her to be curt. One of these times was an in-person exchange. Again, I admired her and ultimately wanted to work things out. The chair, however, treated the complaint as formal grievance and reported the situation to the dean without my consent. Typically, they're supposed to encourage the student and faculty member to communicate, though I had already graduated by that time. Moreover, he told me that my grievance was being formally recorded, yet didn't respond when I asked him where I could obtain these documents. Long story short, it took me around 2 months to view them and I only saw email correspondences between him and the professor, and it seems that he portrayed me as vengefully accusing her of traumatizing me. I wasn't angry that she refused to help with the project, I was hurt that she seemed upset with me and wanted to know why. Having generalized anxiety disorder, I imagined various scenarios, including the prospect that my work wasn't good enough, despite receiving an A in both her courses. Anyway, most of their conversation occurred over the phone, so I don't know precisely what he told her. That I felt that I overreacted, and she assured me that the professor wasn't upset with me and she seemed inclined to write me a letter of recommendation to grad school. One of the emails I was concerned about involved a tepid response when I asked if I could write to her in the future, this matter. So, I decided to write the professor myself to apologize. By this time she was a couple of weeks away from retirement, and given the dean's response, I included the letter of recommendation request. However, she again ignored my email, which sent my anxiety into overdrive, thinking that she wasn't impressed with my work. After all, I experienced a lot of stress and an episode of depression during my last semester with her, or that she hated/resented me, etc. Nonetheless, I understood why she might have felt that way after I wrote to the chair, and I wanted her to know how my anxiety disorder affected me in this situation, my perception of her tone, writing to the chair, etc. So, I contacted the Disability Resource Center and Student Affairs, hoping that someone would reach out to her, but since I was no longer a student, I was referred back to the dean, who instructed them not to respond to me. I then contacted the psychologist who diagnosed me with GAD-OCD, and she was willing to speak to the professor, but only if the professor reached out to her. Given that she didn't reply to my last email, I again contacted the chair, asking him to ask her if she'd like to speak to this psychologist and whether he knew if/why she had been upset with me. I explained that I wasn't filing another complaint but wanted to reconcile with her, but he ignored this email as well. So, I complained to the dean, who again assured me that the professor had no ill will toward me and said she believed the chair handled the situation properly. By this time the professor had retired with a grievance from me to her name, and overwhelmed with guilt, I complained to the provost about the situation. I asked him if he would reach out to her, explained that I felt guilty that I could have hurt her career, etc., and he said that my case was closed from a university perspective. In between this, I complained to the president's office, and they again referred me back to the dean, who said the case was closed. So, I then contacted their general counsel's office hoping to amicably resolve the situation, but they too shut down the case. Finally, I complained to the ombudsman at the Board of Regents, who referred the case to the provost, who again told me the case was closed. So, would I have an emotional distress case against the university for how they handled the situation? I only wanted the opportunity to reconcile with the professor, or at least for her to understand how my mental health affected me, etc. Instead, I have experienced months of guilt, and my anxiety and OCD symptoms have been exacerbated to the point of impairing my productivity. Also, could the school retaliate in any way if I pursue this? Could they rescind my diploma, for example? And would a lawsuit hurt my chances of graduate school either there or at any other suit? Update 2. I wrote to the dean, provost, and Board of Regents only to have my case closed. The department chair mishandling my email about the professor. I then wrote to someone in Human Resources asking that the grievance, if it exists in writing, be removed from her personnel file and any consequences she suffered reversed, and for her to be aware of my requests. This was almost 2 weeks ago, and when I didn't hear back from them after a while, I assumed they had been instructed to ignore me. Soon thereafter, I called the local newspaper's higher education reporter and explained what happened and how it seems too easy to file a grievance against a faculty member at that university, which could reflect dysfunctional departments, admin, etc. The reporter said they had contacted the school and would get back to me. This morning they said that they hadn't heard back from them yet, but I later received an email from Human Resources saying that while faculty's personnel files are confidential, they want to assure me that the information I offered was accepted. So, does this sound like they're granting my requests, and if so, would they call a retired faculty member to inform them that a grievance was reversed? If they do, what should I expect from her professor? Would it be wrong of her not to at least email me saying that she appreciates my efforts? How would you react in such a situation? I'm now worried that after all my efforts, maybe she doesn't even care one way or another. I've gone to great lengths to reverse this situation, and in the process have not only embarrassed myself but sacrificed my own credibility and possibly demolished my chances at attending grad school at this school. If she's who I thought she was, or perhaps hoped she was, all of this was worth it. Yet, it will be disheartening to go through all this trouble only for it not to be appreciated. Again, I just want to know what to expect. Maybe they won't even tell her, but I'll think they have and jump to negative conclusions again, etc. Update 3. First, for those following my saga, I understand that going to the chair ruined my relationship with my professor. However, I'm trying to figure out the likelihood of her having kept in touch with me had that not happened. I only had her for 2 semesters, and one of them was a short 5-week course. So, we didn't exactly know each other well. Though all relationships have a beginning. Next, there's the fact that I submitted a poor, sloppy research paper. Would a professor want to stay in touch with a student after that again, excluding the grievance? Based on other replies, it seems as though friendships typically don't form between professors and students at the undergraduate level. That applies more to the average or below average undergraduate students, and exceptions are made for the best and the brightest. There's also the fact that she's retiring. I found out she hadn't actually retired yet, and may not have felt comfortable giving me her personal email or phone, #, etc. So, does this make sense? she probably, even under the best circumstance, wasn't going to stay in touch with me? Also, would the quality of my paper likely have made a difference had it not been for the grievance? Even in a more general sense, do friendships ever form between undergrad students and professors? Update 4. Last year, I applied to a master's program at my alma mater history, but was rejected on the ground that they didn't have the faculty resources to enable me to pursue my research interests. I suspect this is because I adamantly insisted on having a specific advisor that was retiring the next year, although as I explained in previous posts, our relationship subsequently soured. Even if that hadn't happened, however, I couldn't and still can't see myself working with anyone else. I think being there would be a depressing and painful reminder of her. Additionally, I'm currently in conflict with the department chair. As I stated in my last post, I reported him to the dean, accusing him of negligence in handling this situation with the professor and costing me my relationship with her. The situation has escalated quite far, and pretty much all levels of administration are aware of it. In addition to that, I had another interpersonal conflict with another professor in that department. I never had a class with him, but he agreed to rent me a room in his home and I left after 2 days because the house was filthy. In case anyone is wondering, no, we didn't have a sexual relationship, and he shared the home with his fiancée and stepdaughter. However, after word got out that I left his home, the chair prohibited anyone from helping me with my housing problem and that situation escalated as well. I had previously been living on campus. Despite all this negativity at the university, however, I love living in my current city and do not want to relocate. On the other hand, I realize that the fresh start may be beneficial for me academically. For example, it may be easier for me to work with a new advisor in a different environment where I wouldn't be reminded of the professor I wanted to work with, plus it's better to have positive relationships with faculty. However, then I'll be depressed not being in my city. Also, is it even realistic to remain in one city with an academic career? If I can't get into my alma mater, the alternative is to settle for a bachelor's degree and an average job that I'd likely be bored with. Then again, even if I do get in, it might end up being a negative experience, and I worry that that would affect me academically. I welcome advice from both professors and students. Update 5. While most of my posts until this point have been about the drama with the professor and department chair, which seems to have made me a pariah on this sub, I'm taking a reprieve from that here, and would like to ask if anyone shares my other fears/anxieties and how they managed to succeed in academia/grad school with them. Alternatively, do my specific anxieties make me incompatible with the culture of academia? I love my city too much to permanently relocate, and I sometimes have difficulty adjusting to change depending on the situation. Yet, academia seems very transient. I guess things do become more stable once you get tenure, which I understand is a long shot to begin with, but even if I made it that far, I wouldn't be willing to move absolutely anywhere to achieve it. Even if I was willing to move from this city, which I'm not, there are some cities regions that I'd refuse to relocate to. I'm afraid of flying. I could possibly handle a short flight, i.e. no more than an hour or hour 1/2 tops, but the idea of frequent flying, especially across long distances or internationally, terrifies me. Then, there's the worry of having some type of medical emergency in an unfamiliar city and not having my own doctor nearby or being familiar with which are the good hospitals, etc. I know something like that is unlikely, but you never know, things happen. I become easily stressed. I found my undergraduate courses relatively easy/non-stressful. My circumstances during my last undergrad semesters were an outlier. However, I didn't work at all throughout this period, and I worry about the pressures of graduate school. Taking courses while being a teaching or research assistant and having to submit work to conferences, all while working on my thesis/dissertation, etc. This is the least of my worries, and I suppose I could always request accommodations through the DRC, if necessary, i.e. reduced course load or extended deadlines. I'm actually looking forward to the challenge, as I don't feel like an undergrad. Education means much these days. For those that have been following my situation, I don't anticipate another one like it recurring. My behavior in that situation stemmed from the fact that I admired that professor so much, and it's unlikely I'll develop the same attachment to another one / maybe that's a good thing / The more I care about a person, the more anxious I become about the relationship in any type of relationship. Normally, I would not have acted as I did. So, aside from that situation, does it sound like I could still thrive in academia maybe once I get to the point of being ready to work with another professor? If anyone here has an anxiety disorder, did you have any of my same fears and how did you manage them? Update 6. This is probably going to sound like a troll post, but it's not. I developed a peculiar limerent attachment to a professor who taught me a total of 2 semesters, one of them being a short summer in my late 30s, and this professor is a woman 30 years my senior. My limerence, however, started before I even had a course with her. I first learned of her after perusing the department's faculty directory. Long story short, I was instantly drawn to her photo, not in a sexual way, but I can usually tell immediately even just by a photo if I am going to like someone. Likewise, I was equally as intrigued by the title of a book she had written listed on her faculty bio, and once I read it, I felt compelled to take a course with her. This was the most enlightening course I had ever taken, and I excelled in it. Later in the semester, I had asked her to be in her graduate-level course, and she enthusiastically approved. Instructor approval is required for undergrads taking graduate-level courses. This course included a research component which I looked forward to, but I ended up spending half the semester on the brink of homelessness, moving every few days, which gave me a late start on it. She knew about my housing situation and was very empathetic, even networking with her colleagues to help me. Later in the semester, I had asked her to be my graduate advisor. By this time I was completely obsessed with her, thus, when she informed me that she was in the process of retiring and not accepting new students, I became despondent not in front of her. However, I was still able to do well on quizzes/exams, but my motivation had plummeted and I had difficulty focusing on the research paper. As the due date approached, however, I regained some of my ambition, deciding that I couldn't let my grade fall, and tried to cram months of research into about a week. Additionally, the depression made it difficult for me to focus, and the paper turned out sloppy. While I ended up receiving an A on it, likely out of mercy, I knew this wasn't graduate-level work and worried that she must have perceived me as stupid or lazy. So in an attempt to demonstrate that I could produce better work and have a reason to interact with her, I decided to submit a proposal to a conference I knew she was attending. I had no experience in this area, but my abstract was somehow accepted. I then emailed her asking for assistance with finding volunteers. The project involved interviewing college students and was devastated when I perceived the reply as curt. If taken at face value, she may have been a little upset that I had submitted the abstract before beginning the project and wanted to convey that I was in over my head. My anxiety, however, began escalating, and I decided to write to her again a few days later offering to withdraw the proposal, but still asking for her assistance with finding volunteers. I was completely out of my mind by this point, and just wanted reassurance that she wasn't upset with me. When she didn't respond to this email after 24 hours, she normally responded quickly to emails. I impulsively wrote to the department chair, complaining about her lack of response, the curt tone of her previous response, and other times where I perceived subtle fluctuations in her mood/tone. I later apologized and tried to rescind the grievance, but it's clear that she wants nothing to do with me now. Although I am devastated that our relationship has soured, I realize this relationship probably never existed outside of my mind. I was hoping that we would have stayed in touch after her retirement, but in retrospect, she probably wouldn't have wanted to stay in touch with a student she barely knew. Still, I sometimes can't help but think that she might have liked this had my paper turned out better and I had not reported her to the chair. So I'd appreciate outside perspectives on this. Does it sound like the potential relationship, by which I mean just staying in touch and maybe visiting each other once every so often, was lost, or that there was never any possibility of it? Additionally, this is hurting my future because I feel it will be painful to work with another advisor if I am admitted into a graduate program. So I'm looking for advice on how to lessen this obsession. Also, can limerence be non-sexual? This is more of an emotional than sexual attraction, but it's intense nonetheless. Has anyone experienced anything similar? Again, I know it's odd given our age difference and the fact that she's not even the gender I'm normally attracted to. Update 7. I'm a female and have always felt and identified as straight, i.e., being sexually attracted to men. However, last year I developed an intense emotional infatuation for a woman. This is probably going to sound trollish, but she was my professor. At first, I thought I just admired her professionally/as a person. However, I'm realizing that what I felt/feel is too intense to be completely professional. She's also 30 years older than me, which makes this even more confusing for me. I'm a 37-year-old female and she's 68, albeit looked younger than her age. It's almost 3 a.m. here, and I'm too tired to retype all the details, so I'm sharing the link to another post where I describe the situation. In short, I was madly infatuated with this woman and had a mental breakdown when I learned she was retiring and couldn't be my graduate advisor. I want to apply to graduate school, but still can't see myself working with anyone else, and she's always in my thoughts, etc. I should mention that I also have OCD. I've never felt sexually attracted to women, but if she would have initiated anything physical, she's gay BTW, I would have been open-minded enough to try, but only with her, and I guess it would have depended on what. However, I wasn't seeking a sexual relationship with her. What I wanted most was for her to be my advisor. I wanted frequent contact, deep discussions, emotional intimacy, etc. I never would have crossed any professional boundaries. My question isn't so much about my sexuality, but what I felt for her specifically as a mentor. I said that I would have been open to sexual experimentation with her if she initiated it, but maybe it's because I didn't want to disappoint her in any way, like with a parental figure. Also, could I have projected my love of her course material onto her? Or does it seem like there was a sexual element to this after all? Maybe some combination of all of these? I still feel sexually attracted to / enjoy sex with men and have had sexual encounters since knowing her, nothing that turned into a serious relationship, but not because of her. I'm just curious to know what this is. Update 8, final post before original poster deletes everything. I had a fallout with a former professor many months ago, completely my fault since I reported her to the admin over essentially nothing, and I can't seem to get over it. Although this professor is the same one I mentioned a potential lawsuit against the university, this post is in no way related to legal action against the school or any of its faculty / personnel. So hopefully it's not considered a duplicate post. Anyway, after thinking she had retired, I found out yesterday that she was still in fact teaching part-time online. She's currently residing in another state. I learned this through the department's admin assistant when inquiring about an unrelated matter and couldn't help bringing this up. She said that while she was not permitted to contact faculty about such matters directly, she would pass my message along to the chair. Again, I only wanted her to know how remorseful I was and that my conduct was being affected by a disability. I was not asking for a letter of recommendation or anything in return this time. I don't know why I allowed myself to get my hopes up, but as should have been expected, the chair informed the dean that I had mentioned this, and I received the same generic email from her / the dean / stating that the matter has been closed and the professor has no ill will toward me, etc. So, I've officially given up trying to reconcile with her through the university. However, I want to ask someone she knows outside of the university, though still a professional acquaintance, to explain this situation to her, i.e. that I was affected by a disability and that I feel very remorseful about the situation and wish her the best, etc. However, could this be considered stalking?